Chosen one, these are the reason God is very proud of you. Welcome to the Chosen Bloom. Chosen one, this message didn't find you by chance. You were led here on purpose, by divine design. God brought you to this very moment because He knows the weight you've been carrying, the road you've walked, and the quiet strength you've shown when no one else saw. You've endured what others couldn't. You've remained faithful when quitting would have been easier, and heaven has taken notice. This isn't just encouragement, it's confirmation. God is proud of you, not simply for what you've accomplished, but for who you chose to remain while walking through fire. While others changed, you stayed anchored. While others doubted, you still believed. Now, a shift is coming. This is your season of elevation. But before you rise, you must understand why. There is purpose in this promotion. And in this message, we'll walk through 7 spiritual chapters, each one revealing the deeper reason God is lifting you. This isn't just about reward, it's about recognition from heaven. And this video, this moment, is not content. It's a spiritual announcement. If it reached you, it's because God Himself directed it your way. So, before we go deeper, pause, share, and subscribe, not for algorithm, but for alignment. Because when your spirit resonates with truth, you respond. And if this is speaking to you, already type 77 in the comments. That number is not random. It's a prophetic signal, a sacred confirmation between your spirit and the Most High. It says, I'm ready. I'm aligned. I'm aligned. I receive this elevation with humility and purpose. But understand this, not everyone will make it to the end of this message. Only those whose spirit is in tune will remain. Only the truly chosen will feel the pull to stay. And those who do, they'll walk away with more than words. They'll leave with clarity, divine validation, and a deeper awareness of why this is their season of lifting. This is not a regular message. Treat it like a holy encounter. It is a living word, a divine mirror held up to your spirit, a sacred reminder of who you are and why God has chosen to lift you now. Rewatch this whenever your soul forgets, because with every listen, another layer will be revealed, another truth will rise to the surface, and another door in the spirit will quietly open. Let's begin chapter 1. You obeyed in the dark. Chosen one, God is proud of you. Not just because you obeyed, but because you obeyed when it made no sense. You didn't have a blueprint. There were no clear signs, no angelic trumpet, no spotlight to guide you, just silence and a quiet ache that came with not knowing. And still you moved. You obeyed when the instructions were invisible. You said yes when everything around you screamed, wait. You kept walking not because you saw the road, but because you trusted the voice of the one who called you. Even when you couldn't trace his hand, you trusted his heart. Let's be honest. Obedience in the light is easy. When there's clarity, when there's agreement, when others cheer you on, it feels safe. But obedience in the dark? That's where true faith lives. That's where the chosen are separated from the comfortable. You obeyed not because you understood, but because your spirit recognized the sound of the shepherd's voice. That's the obedience that moves heaven. That's the kind of faith that gets God's attention. You didn't follow instructions, you followed presence. And that kind of obedience shakes the heavens. While others clung to logic, you chose faith. While they waited for proof, you moved on revelation. You weren't looking for a flawless plan, you were following a flawless God. You didn't need every question answered, you just needed one word from Him. And when you heard it, you moved. Even when it meant leaving comfort behind. Even when it meant walking alone. Even when it meant being misunderstood, mocked, called irrational. There were moments you could have turned back. Moments you seriously thought about giving up. The pressure was real. The path was blurry. But something holy inside you whispered, keep going. And you did. Not because you were fearless, but because your spirit knew something deeper, that obedience matters more than outcome. That being in God's will is safer than being in the world's approval. And here's what many never saw: people watched you walk and assumed you had it all figured out. But they didn't see the inside. They didn't see that you were stepping forward on nothing but faith. What looked like confidence on the outside was often trembling trust on the inside. You didn't always feel strong, but you stayed faithful. And in the kingdom, faithfulness is strength. Chosen one, God saw every step you took in the dark, every private sacrifice, every silent yes, every quiet moment where you chose to believe even when it hurt. That kind of obedience, the kind done in the dark, doesn't go unnoticed. In fact, it's the very reason God is lifting you now. You've shown heaven something rare, that you don't follow God for blessings, you follow him because of love, because of trust, and because of covenant. And that posture, that heart, is what God rewards. You obeyed when it cost you. You obeyed when you were wounded. You obeyed even when there was no benefit in sight. And that kind of obedience planted something powerful, a seed in the spirit realm, a seed of unshakable faith. And now, in this season, that invisible seed is bearing visible fruit. This elevation, it's not just a blessing, it's a result, a manifestation, a holy response to what was sown in secret. God is lifting you now because you proved that you could walk without seeing, that you could trust without answers, that you could move without applause. Chosen one, your obedience in the dark has qualified you for promotion in the light. You didn't rush the process. You didn't manipulate the moment. You didn't settle for shortcuts. You waited. You trusted. You endured. And now heaven isn't just proud, heaven is responding. Chapter 2, you held on when it felt like God went silent. Chosen one, there were seasons you didn't just walk through, you survived them. Long nights without answers. Silent mornings where God felt distant. You cried out for direction and heard only echo. You pleaded for clarity and received only stillness. It was in those moments when God seemed silent that your faith was tested the most. And yet, you held on. There were nights you cried yourself to sleep wondering, did God forget me? You looked around at your life and thought, this doesn't look like the promise. You watched others be blessed while you were still waiting. You saw doors fly open for people who didn't even acknowledge God, while you, his faithful one, remained in the hallway. And the silence? It wasn't just quiet. It was painful. It pierced deeper than words. It made you question everything: your path, your prayers, your worth, even your own mind.
But still,
you didn't let go. Even when you couldn't hear him, you still believed in him. That's what set you apart. That's what made you chosen. You didn't follow God just because of what he gave. You followed him because of who he is. You didn't worship him for the outcome. You worshiped him out of overflowing trust. You prayed even when the heavens were still. You praised even when the pain was loud. You stayed even when your heart screamed to run, and heaven watched it all. That kind of endurance shakes the spirit realm, because anyone can trust when the way is clear. Anyone can praise when the breakthrough comes easy. But it takes a deeply rooted soul to stand in the middle of silence and still whisper, God, I trust you. You weren't walking by sight. You were walking by memory, by covenant, by a relationship that was deeper than your emotions and stronger than your circumstances. You didn't always feel strong, but your strength wasn't in how you felt. It was in your consistency, in the way you kept showing up during the silence. Every time you lifted your head when quitting would have been easier. Every time you opened your Bible when your heart was too heavy to read. Every time you whispered, God, I don't understand, but I still believe. You were making a declaration in the spirit realm. I am unshakable. Chosen one, those silent seasons weren't punishment, they were preparation. God was watching how you would respond without the blessings, without the miracles, without the affirmation. And you passed the test. Not because you were flawless, but because you stayed. And now heaven is moving. God is about to reward you, not just for your faith, but for your faithfulness. For the way you clung to Him when He felt far. For the way you refused to give up when you had every reason to let go. You thought His silence meant absence, but in truth, He was watching you grow. He was watching you mature, watching you become the kind of vessel He could trust with more. Because if you could trust Him in silence, He knows you won't lose your mind when the volume gets loud. If you could stay grounded when no one was clapping, then God knows you won't become prideful when the spotlight comes. If you could worship Him in the valley, He knows you'll remain humble on the mountaintop. Because this was never just about what you could endure, it was always about who you were becoming in the midst of that endurance. And now that you've been refined in silence, God is about to speak loudly. Through miracles, through open doors you didn't knock on, through elevation you didn't orchestrate. The very silence that once made you question everything is about to become the platform for your loudest testimony. Chapter 3. You stayed pure when the world pushed perversion. Chosen one, in a time where compromise has become common and purity is mocked as outdated or too deep, you chose the narrow road. You could have given in. You could have lowered your standards. You could have numbed your convictions just to blend in. But you didn't. You stood your ground. You were tempted, pressured, ridiculed, even isolated. People laughed at your values. They called you too holy, too sensitive, too extreme. But what the world called too much, heaven called set apart. While others chased platforms and popularity, you guarded your heart. While the world told you to loosen up, you tightened your boundaries. And when perversion came knocking, you didn't flirt with it, you shut the door. You didn't just protect your body. You protected your soul. You refused to be seduced by the lust for fame, attention, or fast pleasure. You weren't out here performing or you were consecrated, quiet, hidden. You stayed beneath God's covering even when it meant missing out. On friendships, on relationships, on opportunities. And let's be real, purity was never just about physical boundaries. It was about your thoughts, your motives, your intentions, and you fought to keep them pure. You didn't let bitterness take root in your heart. You didn't let jealousy poison your spirit. You didn't let ambition distort your purpose. You kept yourself clean not to win the approval of man, but because you knew God was watching. And that kind of discipline, it's not weakness, it's warfare. You were in battle daily with your flesh, your emotions, and your surroundings, and still, you came through pure. You didn't resist temptation once you resisted it over and over, quietly, secretly. Even when no one would have known if you slipped, you still chose the higher road. You honored God in private, and now He's about to honor you in public? Because many think elevation is about talent. But in the kingdom, God doesn't promote based on gifting alone. God promotes based on purity of heart, because the higher you go, the heavier the pressure becomes. The temptation gets louder in the spotlight. The stakes rise with the elevation. And if you can't stay clean on the ground, you won't survive in the clouds. That's why your purity mattered. It wasn't just a moral label. It was a divine requirement for where God is about to take you. He's looking for those who won't compromise when money gets involved. He's searching for voices that won't be bought. He needs leaders whose integrity won't collapse under influence. And you, chosen one, you've proven that? You've shown that you can carry weight without becoming intoxicated by attention, that you can walk in authority without slipping into arrogance, that you can hold power without losing purity. That's why God is lifting you. The world offered shortcuts, but you took the long road, the hard road, the holy road. And now, what God is preparing for you won't just be big, it will be pure. Because He knows you won't worship the blessing. You'll worship the one who gave it. This elevation isn't just a reward for what you resisted. It's a response to what you protected. You protected your soul. You guarded your calling. You shielded your oil. And now God is about to pour back into you in ways your mind hasn't even conceived. He's lifting you not just because you're gifted, but because you're clean.
Because you're ready.
Because you're trustworthy. Because you're pure. In a world that tried everything to defile you, you stayed undefiled. And heaven is proud. Chapter 4, you blessed others when you needed a blessing. Chosen one, let's speak truth. There were moments when your heart was breaking, but you still found the strength to mend someone else's. There were days when your spirit was exhausted, yet you became the lifeline for someone standing on the edge. You were the encourager even while you were secretly discouraged, the helper while you were hurting, the supporter while you were silently battling storms of your own. You gave when you barely had. And not just financially, you gave emotionally, spiritually, mentally. Sometimes all you had left was a kind word and you gave it. Sometimes your energy was drained, your mind was heavy, and your heart was aching, but you still showed up for people who never even knew the cost of your presence. And God saw all of it. Nothing you did went unnoticed. Every time you chose compassion over complaint, generosity over bitterness, service over selfishness, it was recorded in heaven. While the world applauded loud performers, God smiled at your quiet obedience. You weren't performing. You were pouring. And even when no one poured back into you, you didn't stop. That's not weakness. That's spiritual strength. That's kingdom character. You weren't just doing good deeds. You were sowing seeds. You planted seeds, seeds of compassion, seeds of mercy, seeds of unshakable love, seeds of faith, seeds of intercession. And you didn't plant them in soft, easy soil. You sowed in hard seasons, in dry places, in weary moments when it would have made more sense to hold back. But you didn't. Chosen one, you became a well for others, even when you were thirsty yourself. You were light in dark rooms, joy in heavy spaces, peace in chaotic storms. And here's the truth, you didn't have to. You could have shut down. You could have let disappointment harden you. You could have said, since no one is helping me, I won't help anyone else. But you didn't. You kept giving. You kept loving. You kept showing up. That's why the blessing that's coming isn't random. It's not just a breakthrough, it's a harvest. You're not being blessed just because you asked. You're being blessed because you became a blessing. You made heaven's priorities your own. You lifted others so selflessly, and now God is about to lift you in a way that cannot be measured. Get ready, because the very people who saw you as their backup are about to see God back you up. Those who mistook your kindness for weakness are about to witness your divine reward. God is repaying you not just for what you gave, but for how you gave, with joy,
with humility,
with no expectation, no strings attached. As Luke 6:38 declares, "Give, and it shall be given unto you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." That's not just a verse. That's your reality in this season. What you poured out when no one was pouring into you is about to return in multiplied form. Blessings are about to chase you down, not because you demanded them, but because you embodied them. And more than that, you're not just receiving a blessing, you're becoming one. Your very presence will shift atmospheres. Your words will carry healing. Your life will become a living testimony. You won't just walk into rooms as a person. You'll walk in as an answer, as a light, as a divine vessel overflowing because you once gave from emptiness. Chapter 5, you didn't bend to fit in, you stood to stand out. Chosen one, you were never built to blend in. You were never wired to follow the crowd. From the very beginning, something about you was different, and deep down, you always knew it. You tried to fit in for a while, didn't you? You tried to mute your spirit, to blend your boldness, to soften your light just enough to be accepted in rooms you were never meant to be in. But it never worked. Because no matter how hard you tried to camouflage yourself, your calling refused to stay hidden. Even when isolation hurt, even when the silence grew loud, even when rejection made you question your worth, you still didn't bow to conformity. You refused to shrink just to make others comfortable. You didn't trade your authenticity for approval. And even though there were moments you questioned why you felt so out of place, something deep in your spirit kept whispering, you were never called to fit in. You were called to lead. You weren't rejected because you were wrong. You were rejected because you were right for the right thing. Your spirit didn't match their system. Your fire didn't fit their mold. Your vision was too sharp. Your passion too deep. Your purity too rare. And that threatened those who chose comfort over conviction. You were called too much, too serious, too spiritual, too intense. But in truth, you were too chosen to dilute yourself. You didn't let the mockery rewrite your message. You didn't let loneliness break your loyalty to God. You kept showing up as yourself even when the world begged you to become someone else. And let's be honest, it cost you. It cost you friendships. It cost you platforms. It cost you open doors. Maybe even relationships you thought were forever. But you made a decision. I'd rather lose the world than lose myself. That's the choice you made. You weren't chasing applause. You were chasing assignment. You weren't looking for followers, you were looking for faithfulness. And that kind of resolve, heaven honors it. Because when you stand for something higher, you'll often stand alone. But God was watching. He saw you walk away from platforms that required compromise. He saw you turn down open doors that didn't align with your spirit. He saw the nights you cried because you felt unseen, misunderstood, uninvited. And still you refused to bend. You didn't edit your anointing to make it more palatable. You didn't hide your calling to make others more comfortable. You didn't shrink your light just to fit their shadow. You stood firm, bold, rooted, even when it was unpopular, even when it was uncomfortable. And now God is about to honor that stand. He's about to elevate the very identity people told you to tone down. The same oil they didn't understand is the oil he's about to use to bring breakthrough to nations. The very thing they mocked is the very thing God is now magnifying. Because when you refuse to bend to fit in, you position yourself to rise and stand out. Chosen one, you weren't called to blend in with the crowd. You were called to shift the crowd. You were called to lead it. You were never meant to echo culture. You were designed to shift it. You no longer need to explain why you're different. You simply need to walk boldly in the fullness of who God created you to be. Because this next elevation won't come through imitation. It's coming through authenticity. Chapter 6, you kept the faith when the facts said otherwise. Chosen one, you've walked through storms that would have drowned others. You've stood in the middle of impossible situations, surrounded by facts that scream defeat. The numbers didn't add up. The doors didn't open. The reports didn't match the prayers you prayed. Everything around you whispered, "It's over." And yet, you still believed. Your bank account said lack, but you declared abundance. The diagnosis said incurable, but you spoke healing. Your circumstances said stuck, but your spirit cried, "Freedom is coming." That's not denial. That's not delusion. That's faith. And not just ordinary faith. Mountain moving, atmosphere shifting, heaven alerting faith. There were moments when the facts were so loud, it would have been easy to agree with them, but you didn't. You refused to bow to temporary circumstances. You refused to let what was natural override what you knew was supernatural. You stared at the storm and said, "My God is still good." You looked at the empty table and still said, "My God provides." You stared down the delay and declared, "My promise is still alive." That kind of faith terrifies the enemy because facts can be manipulated, but faith is anchored. True faith doesn't shift with the weather. It doesn't collapse when the report is unfavorable. It doesn't retreat just because reality screams for surrender. Your faith held firm, not because things were easy, but because you knew the character of the one who called you. You didn't just believe in God. You believed God. That's deeper. That's different. Some waited until things make sense before they praise, but you praised in the wilderness. Some wait until the blessing arrives to believe, but you believed before the miracle even had a pulse. Some only trust when life feels under control, but you trusted when everything was falling apart. And heaven never forgot it. Every time the enemy brought you evidence that it wouldn't happen, you responded with a promise. Every time your circumstances handed you proof of failure, you countered with scripture. You didn't let the devil's facts override God's faithfulness. What you couldn't see was that while you were speaking faith on earth, heaven was dispatching angels. While you were declaring victory in the valley, the spirit realm was being shaken. Because true faith doesn't just survive the test, it activates heaven. It opens doors no man can shut. It sets miracles in motion. And that's exactly what your faith has done. This season is not just about what you endured, it's about what you believed while you endured it. You didn't wait for the manifestation before you moved like it was done. You carried yourself like the answer had already come because in the spirit it had. Chapter 7, you stayed humble when you could have flexed. Chosen one, you had every right to defend yourself. You had the truth. The evidence. The receipts. But you didn't take the bait. You didn't clap back. You didn't engage in petty warfare. Even when you were right, you chose silence over strife. Even when you were dishonored, you chose dignity. Even when they lied on you, excluded you, or tried to stain your name, you kept your peace and let God hold your case. That wasn't weakness. That was wisdom. That wasn't passivity. That was power under control. You took the low road, not because you lacked strength, but because you possessed spiritual maturity. You understood something most people overlook. Vindication doesn't come through fleshly battles. It comes when you let heaven speak on your behalf. You could have flexed. You could have bragged. You could have tried to prove everyone wrong when the tables turned. But instead, you stayed low. You stayed quiet. You stayed faithful. You didn't chase the spotlight. You stayed hidden until God said, "Now." You didn't use your wins to shame others. You used your wins to glorify God. And that is why this next season of elevation is unstoppable. Because it's not built on self-promotion. It's rooted in divine timing. Your humility in private has prepared you for honor in public. You've proven that your character is rooted, not rented. That your heart is submitted, not self-centered. You've shown God that He can trust you with more, and it won't change who you are. That you can be lifted without becoming prideful. That you can be praised without losing your posture. And here's the truth, heaven always exalts the humble. That's not opinion. That's a spiritual law. It cannot be skipped. It cannot be broken. When you stay low, God lifts you high. When you don't chase a throne, He gives you one. When you don't fight for a seat at the table, He prepares one in the presence of your enemies. Chapter 8. You forgave when you had every right to hold grudges. Chosen one, you've been wounded by those who were meant to protect you. Betrayed by the ones you trusted most. Abandoned when you needed support the most. Lied about simply for standing in truth. The hurt was real. The scars ran deep. The pain echoed through months, sometimes years. And in the spirit, you had every legal right to hold on to that offense. Every reason to nurse the wound. Every justification to build walls, shut down, and walk away for good. But you didn't. Instead, you chose the most supernatural response possible. You forgave. Not because they earned it, not because they asked for it, and certainly not because it was easy. You forgave because your heart was too pure to carry poison. Your calling too important to let bitterness contaminate it. You released people who never even acknowledged the damage they caused. You blessed those who cursed you. You prayed for those who persecuted you. And that level of grace, that wasn't human. That was heaven flowing through an earthly vessel. Some called it foolish. Some said you were too soft, too quick to forgive. They told you to stand up for yourself. But you understood what they didn't. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's warfare. Every time you chose to forgive, you shattered chains in the spirit. You dismantled strongholds. You set captives free, including yourself. And God, He saw it all. He's proud of you. Because forgiveness is His nature. It's His character flowing through you. When you forgave the unforgivable, you became Christ-like in the truest sense. You reflected the heart of the one who forgave His own executioners while hanging on a cross. Chapter 9. You praised in the prison. Chosen one, there were seasons when your life looked nothing like your prayers. You were thrown into valleys you never chose, storms you didn't start, and prisons of pain that felt like they had no door, no key, no escape. But even there, you praised. In the dark places where worship made no logical sense, you lifted your voice anyway. You worshipped through tears. You sang through sorrow. You raised your hands when your heart was heavy. Not because you felt like it, but because you understood this. Praise isn't based on emotion. It's based on His worth. Like Paul and Silas locked up at midnight in that Philippian jail, your praise in the prison shook foundation. What looked like your lowest moment on earth was actually your loudest declaration in heaven. My God is still good even here. My God is still God even now. Your praise wasn't performance, it was proclamation. You weren't trying to convince yourself. You were announcing truth over your situation. And that kind of worship? It moves heaven faster than 1,000 petitions ever could. God is lifting you now, not just because you prayed in faith, but because you praised in pain. You praised when the outcome was unclear. You praised when the breakthrough hadn't come. You praised when the prison doors were still shut. And now, He's opening them wide. Because you've proven your worship wasn't conditional, it was covenant. You will praise Him in the palace because you praised Him in the pit. Chapter 10. You invested in your gift when no one was watching. Chosen one, while others were chasing shortcuts and quick recognition, you were digging deep in silence. You weren't looking for instant applause, you were focused on building something that would last. You spent hours in private preparation for a public moment that hadn't even been promised. You studied while others slept. You practiced when you could have relaxed. You chose growth when comfort was more convenient. Not because success was guaranteed, but because you believed that stewardship is a form of worship. You honed your gift in the hidden places, in your room, in your car, in those quiet, sacred hours when no one was watching but God. You took the time to sharpen what He placed in your hands. You read, you learn, you practiced, you asked questions. You sought wisdom, not for applause, but for excellence. Not for fame, but for faithfulness. Not to be seen, but to be ready. And heaven noticed. God is proud of you because you treated your gift as a sacred trust. You didn't bury it like the unfaithful servant. You multiplied it. You refined it. You prepared it for purpose. And now, when your moment comes, you won't be scrambling to get ready. You'll already be prepared. Because preparation met opportunity in secret. And now, promotion is meeting you in public. Chapter 11, you loved the unlovable. Chosen one, you looked past the rough edges and saw the wounded hearts. You looked beyond the harsh words and recognized the hidden pain. Where others saw a problem, you saw a person. Where others saw enemies, you saw souls in need of healing. You loved the difficult ones, the prickly, the prideful, the broken, and the bitter. Not because it was easy, but because love was your language. You extended grace to those who gave you nothing but grief. You offered kindness to those who gave only criticism. You responded with compassion when others expected you to walk away. You didn't love people because they were lovable. You loved them because love lived in you. And that kind of love? That's not from this world. That's God's heart beating through human hands. God is proud of you because you made His love visible to those who felt invisible. You became His arms to the abandoned. You became His voice to the voiceless. You didn't just talk about love, you embodied it. Chapter 12, you stewarded little with great faithfulness. Chosen one, you were faithful in the small things when no one was watching. You managed your few dollars like they were millions. You treated your tiny platform like it was a global stage. You served in hidden places with the same passion others reserved for the spotlight. You showed up early. You stayed late. You gave your best even when the task seemed beneath you. Because you understood a divine principle, character is forged in the mundane, not just revealed in the magnificent. You didn't despise the day of small beginnings. You honored it. You respected it. You stewarded it. Because you knew how you handle the little determines how much God can trust you with later. You swept floors with the same integrity you'll one day lead movements with. You served tables like you were serving the King Himself. And heaven recorded every moment. God is elevating you now, not because of how much you had, but because of how you handled it. Because you proved that size doesn't determine your service. Your heart does. And now, you will manage much because you were faithful with little. Chapter 13, you stood for truth when lies were louder. Chosen one, you lived in a generation where truth was treated like an opinion, and absolutes were labeled offensive. But you refused to bow. You didn't bend your convictions just to blend with culture's compromise. When everyone around you was shouting, "That's just your truth," you stood on the truth. When the crowd went left, and it would have been easier to follow you, held your ground and went right. You didn't dilute your standards to gain their acceptance. You didn't trade your convictions for comfort. You spoke truth in love, even when love was being redefined. You held fast to scripture, even when it was called outdated. You remained anchored in a time where everything was shifting like sand. And heaven took note. God is proud of you because you were willing to be unpopular to remain pure. You chose controversy over compromise. You chose conviction over convenience. You understood what many forgot: truth isn't determined by consensus. It's established by God's word. You didn't just stand for truth. You embodied it. And now, the same God you stood for is about to stand up for you. Chapter 14, you built others up while you were broken down. Chosen one, there were seasons when you felt completely empty, yet you still poured into others. When your dreams were delayed, you still encouraged others to chase theirs. When your heart was healing, you helped mend the pieces in someone else's. You celebrated their victories even while you were still waiting on your own. You showed up to their events when no one showed up to yours. You shared their posts, promoted their businesses, supported their dreams, even when you silently wished someone would do the same for you. That wasn't people pleasing. That was purpose living. You knew your calling wasn't just about being blessed, it was about becoming a blessing. Even in your own wilderness, you became an oasis. Even while walking through your dry place, you offered water to others. And heaven noticed. God is about to honor the way you honored others. The same hands you used to lift others are now about to be lifted. The same energy you gave to build others is about to return multiplied and magnified beyond what you could imagine. Because you didn't wait until you were whole to help. You gave while bleeding. You served while waiting. You built while broken. And now it's your turn. Chosen one, you're about to become undeniable proof of this principle. The promotion that's coming will not be the result of connections, networking, or manipulation. It will be the result of your humility. The doors that are opening for you, they're not man-made. They're God-sent. Because while others were obsessed with image, you were focused on integrity. While they chased clout, you chased character. While they fought to be seen, you allowed yourself to be shaped. And now that God has seen your heart, He's about to showcase your harvest. You stayed humble when you could have flexed. You stayed silent when you could have snapped. You stayed gracious when you could have gloated. And because of that, this elevation will be pure, permanent, and powerful.